Roland Dale and I grew up together, our compatibility as measured by pheromones an astonishing 96%. Everyone assumed we'd naturally end up together. So did I. But on his birthday night, he pulled me aside. "Jeremy," he began, his voice calm yet firm. "I thought you understood, we're just brothers. That's all." He smiled faintly, but there was a certainty in his tone that left no room for argument. "Sure, our compatibility is high, but that's it, right?" Though phrased as a question, his words felt like a verdict. Days later, a new transfer student became my deskmate. Our first meeting was dramatic. We had such an intense reaction to each other's pheromones that we ended up at the hospital. The test results came back. Compatibility, 98%. Welcome to He History Channel. Subscribe to follow all our latest adventures. Story begins. After school, I packed my things and went to find Roland in his classroom so we could walk home together, as usual. At the back door, I bumped into one of his classmates. The classmate wasn't surprised to see me, merely smirking as they glanced back toward the classroom. In a voice tinged with amusement, they called out, "Roland, your wife's here." The title startled me, freezing me in place for a second. When I recovered, I quickly corrected them. "We're not like that." My protest, however, was drowned out by the uproarious laughter and teasing inside the classroom. As the commotion subsided, Roland leaned casually against his desk, kicking its leg lightly with his foot. He smirked, raising an eyebrow as he spoke. "We're just brothers. Don't spread nonsense." With that, he grabbed his bag and headed out. But as he approached, I noticed something. His smile faded with each step. By the time he reached me, his expression was as cool as ever. "Let's go," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. The walk home was quiet, awkward even. Though we walked side by side, it felt as though we were merely two strangers heading in the same direction. It hadn't always been like this. Our families had been neighbors for as long as I could remember, and with only a year separating us in age, we were inseparable. From kindergarten to high school, we walked to and from school together, sharing every little moment of our days. But lately, though I couldn't pinpoint when exactly, things had changed. Roland grew distant. With his friends, he was all smiles, but with me, his expression remained cold, indifferent. I didn't understand it. I didn't want to lose our friendship without knowing why. Gritting my teeth, I finally decided to speak up. "Roland, have you been?" I stopped mid-sentence when I saw the slight crease of irritation in his brow. "What?" he asked, his tone questioning yet detached. Shaking my head, I muttered, "Forget it." Even that small exchange felt like too much for him. Later that evening, my family and I joined his for his birthday dinner. The adults chatted happily, oblivious to the tension between Roland and me. "Are you two fighting?" his mom asked, her gaze flickering between us. I forced a smile. "No." The conversation quickly shifted to us. "It's amazing how compatible they are, isn't it?" one of our mothers said. "Not just in age but with a 96% pheromone match. Right? If they ended up together..." "Mom," Roland interrupted sharply, frowning. His mother raised her hands in mock surrender. Fine. I won't say another word." The meal continued, the earlier exchange leaving a faint undercurrent of tension. When dinner ended, Roland nudged me lightly under the table. Without a word, I followed him outside, the two of us wandering aimlessly under the quiet night sky. For a long while, the only sound was the crunch of our footsteps on the pavement. Finally, he broke the silence. "Jeremy," he said, his voice soft yet resolute. "I thought you understood, we're just brothers. That's all." His gaze met mine, steady and unwavering. "Sure, our compatibility is high, but that's it, right?" This time, his question wasn't a question at all. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to nod. "Yeah, I know." His shoulders relaxed slightly and he exhaled, relieved. Back home, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Memories of our childhood played in my mind. Two inseparable kids waiting for their parents to come home, laughing over silly jokes, sharing dreams of the future. When we differentiated, him as an alpha, me as an omega, our parents had been ecstatic about the 96% match, frequently hinting at what a perfect pair we'd make. Even our classmates teased us, calling us inseparable. Gradually, I started believing it too. But tonight, his words had shattered that illusion. Lying there in the dark, I replayed everything in my mind, trying to understand, trying to reconcile my feelings. Sleep didn't come until the early hours of the morning. The next morning, as I waited by the school gates, Roland Dale emerged, his expression briefly flickering with awkwardness when he saw me. I, on the other hand, acted perfectly normal. As we descended the stairs, I decided to clear the air, speaking with deliberate seriousness. Roland, I've thought about what you said last night. I get it now. I misunderstood because of what others have said, but don't worry, I see now that it really wasn't right of me to assume things. So, there's no need to feel awkward. Let's just keep being friends, the way we always have. If I'd assumed we'd naturally end up together just because we grew up close and our compatibility was high, that really wouldn't have been fair. Feelings shouldn't be measured by numbers or expectations. When Roland didn't immediately reply, I glanced up at him, confused. He quickly looked away, avoiding my gaze, and nodded slowly. Yeah, that's good, he said, his tone carrying an inexplicable complexity. I didn't think much of it, eager to get back to class and catch up on some sleep. But as I entered the classroom, I was greeted by an unexpected sight. A new face sitting at the desk beside mine. I sat in the back row by the wall, so it wasn't a case of someone sitting in the wrong seat. After confirming I was in the right classroom, I hesitantly walked over to my desk. The closer I got, the more I noticed a faint but unmistakable scent of brandy. It was subtle, but it lingered with surprising intensity. Curiously, the boy had a suppressant patch on the gland at the back of his neck. Even so, his scent was distinct, something that had never happened when I was around Roland. With the limited knowledge I had about pheromones, there was only one conclusion to draw. Our compatibility must be extremely high. Possibly even higher than mine and Roland's. When I sat down, the scent grew even stronger, enveloping the entire corner of the room like a rich cloud of aged liquor. I stole a glance at him, my thoughts swirling in confusion. I didn't notice him stirring until I suddenly found myself staring into a pair of warm brown eyes. Still half asleep, his lips moved slightly as he murmured, "Grapes? My pheromones. They smelled like grapes." His gaze sharpened with awareness, and he sniffed the air, his eyes lighting up as they locked onto me. "Your grapes?" Pheromones are nothing if not perceptive. I rarely heard people comment on mine. Grape-scented pheromones weren't exactly a conversation starter. But being called out twice in a row like this left me feeling strangely unsettled. I coughed lightly, forcing my tone to stay casual. "I'm Jeremy Gascoigne. And, yes, my pheromones smell like grapes." The boy straightened, his movements fluid and unhurried. Sitting upright, he seemed taller than me by a fair margin, his messy black hair falling lazily across his forehead. He grinned, his smile radiating a clean, sunny warmth. "Hi, I'm Alexander Stollybras." Later, I learned he was the new transfer student. Alexander was the outgoing type. Despite only knowing me for a day, he had a knack for blurting out things that left me at a loss for how to respond. "You're really good looking. You look great in your uniform. Your voice is so nice. And that grape scent? Perfect. Not too strong, not too faint. Just right. Do you notice my scent? What do you think? Do you like it?" His directness was overwhelming. I wasn't sure how to deal with someone like him. As I struggled to find a response, my front row classmate turned around, their face alight with curiosity. "Grapes? Who smells like grapes?" I froze, watching as the gossiping eyes in the room turned toward our corner. Panicking, I clamped my hand over Alexander's mouth. "Nothing. You must have misheard." Once the attention shifted away, I sighed in relief. only to realize the soft sensation against my palm in Alexander's wide, pitiful eyes. Flustered, I yanked my hand back, my ears burning. "Sorry. I didn't mean to do that." Alexander chuckled, his voice bright and carefree. "It's fine. You can cover my mouth anytime you want." I wasn't particularly outgoing and usually needed time to warm up to people. But Alexander was persistent. He insisted on eating lunch together, running beside me in PE, and even tagging along to basketball practice, his puppy-like eyes practically begging me to let him join. When he found out we lived in the same direction, he enthusiastically suggested walking to and from school together, an idea I firmly declined. And yet, despite his clinginess, he was never overbearing. Somehow, his sincerity made it hard to dislike him. Before I knew it, we were getting along naturally, even comfortably. Others in the class noticed how close we'd become and started talking about it. Word eventually reached Roland. One of his friends nudged him, motioning toward me and Alexander laughing on the basketball court. "Jealous? Didn't you say you were getting tired of seeing Jeremy Gascoigne all the time? Now that he's found someone else to hang out with, why the long face?" Roland's gaze lingered on us, his brow furrowed slightly. "I'm not jealous. Jeremy and I have been together since we were kids. This is just something new for him." His friend smirked. "We'll see how long you can keep that up." Exhausted from basketball, I swapped out and sat on the sidelines, gulping down water. That was when I noticed someone standing next to me, Roland Dale. His expression was stiff, his unease palpable. "You and him seem to get along pretty well," he remarked. Since our talk the other night, I had mentally relegated Roland to the status of a regular friend, nothing more. So, at his comment, I casually shifted my gaze to Alexander Stollybras. Under the sunlight, Alexander seemed the embodiment of youthful exuberance, confident, lively, and carefree. Unconsciously, a small smile tugged at my lips as I responded, though my tone carried a hint of exasperation. "He's great. Just a little too clingy." I didn't pay attention to Roland's face, but I caught the stiffness in his tone as he asked, "Jeremy, do you like him?" I frowned, baffled. "What are you talking about? We're just friends." "Sorry," Roland muttered after a pause, his voice strained. "It's just that you've gotten close so quickly." I couldn't help but wonder. Have you ever considered whether your bond might be influenced by something else? I pressed my lips together, feeling a flicker of annoyance. "If you have something to say, Roland, just say it. Stop dancing around the point." He took a deep breath and finally said it. "Like pheromones. You mentioned you could smell each other even with suppressant patches on. That suggests your compatibility is really high. Don't you think it's possible that's what's drawing you together?" A sharp pang of frustration flared in my chest. "Roland Dale," I said evenly, though anger simmered beneath my words, "is that how little you think of me? That I'd let pheromones dictate my relationships? That's not what I meant, Jeremy." I cut him off, closing my eyes briefly to steady myself. "Sometimes I feel like you don't know me at all. We've known each other for years, Roland, yet you seem to understand me less than he does." Disappointment weighed heavy on me. How could he not see? We'd grown up together. If anyone should know my character, it was him. Sure, pheromones might have sparked an initial impression, but I wasn't shallow enough to build a friendship solely on something so instinctual. What I had with Alexander came from spending time together, getting to know each other, and realizing, through both reason and feeling, that we simply clicked. A cool sensation snapped me out of my spiraling thoughts. I looked up to find Alexander crouching slightly, his warm brown eyes filled with concern. "Jeremy, are you okay?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "I'm fine. Are you heading home now? Want to walk together?" The walk was quiet, my thoughts still tangled. I followed Alexander's steps unconsciously until he suddenly stopped. Looking around, I realized he'd led me to a park. With a reassuring smile, he gently grabbed my wrist and led me to a swing set. "I don't know what's bothering you," but they say swinging helps lighten your mood. Hop on, I'll push you. It felt childish, but his earnest expression made it hard to refuse. Without a word, I sat on the swing, and he moved behind me to push it. The swing rose and fell gently, the cool breeze brushing against my face. From the highest point, I could see the park alive with laughter, children running, their carefree giggles filling the air. Gradually, the frustration knotted in my chest began to ease. When the swing slowed, Alexander held it steady, leaning slightly closer to keep me balanced. The warmth of his breath brushed the back of my neck, and even with the suppressant patch, my glands reacted. The faint grape scent of my pheromones burst out, unbidden and sudden. Embarrassed, I felt my face heat instantly. Alexander quickly stepped back, his breathing slightly erratic. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed his cheeks were just as red. On the way home, we walked side by side, but the air between us had changed, thicker, charged with a heat I couldn't quite explain. A soft breeze scattered leaves from the trees above, and Alexander reached up to pluck one from my hair. He cleared his throat awkwardly, his voice tinged with a nervous edge. I just wanted to cheer you up. That's all. Seeing his flustered expression, I couldn't help but smile, biting my lip to keep from laughing. Thank you, Alexander, I said sincerely. After that day, things between Roland and me grew tense, a cold war of unspoken words and unacknowledged emotions. Meanwhile, Alexander became my new companion for walks to and from school. Not long after, the annual fitness exams approached, and Alexander volunteered to help me train. Every afternoon, we ran laps after school. Despite being an alpha with far superior stamina, he paced himself to match my slower strides, counting the rhythm of my steps as encouragement. The training paid off. On the day of the test, he stood at the finish line, stopwatch in hand, ready to record my time. Running alone felt different. Without his chatter to distract me, the 1,000 meters seemed endless. By the time I reached the last 50 meters, my legs burned, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I spotted Alexander standing at the finish line, craning his neck anxiously as he waved me forward. Something in his expression softened the ache in my chest, and I summoned the last of my strength to push forward. The moment I crossed the line, my legs buckled, and I stumbled into Alexander's arms. He caught me effortlessly, his strong hands steadying my waist as I clung to him, resting my head on his shoulder, breathless. When I finally recovered and stepped back, his hands lingered on my waist, absent-mindedly loose. Oblivious, he grinned and held up the stopwatch for me to see, his excitement infectious. Jeremy, you passed by 40 seconds. The sky burned with the golden hues of the setting sun, and in my line of sight stood Alexander Stollybras, his youthful energy vibrant against the backdrop of amber light. The faint scent of brandy lingered in the air, wrapping around us like a delicate thread. He stopped mid-sentence, blinking in surprise as he caught me staring at him. His cheeks flushed, and he awkwardly scratched his head. Is there something on my face? I shook my head, heart pounding wildly in my chest. My face felt unbearably warm, and I swore even my eyes were beginning to redden. To mask my embarrassment, I leaned forward, resting my head on his shoulder as casually as I could, shielding my expression from view. After that day, something changed between us. What used to be easy, like slinging an arm around my shoulder, now came with hesitation. More than once, I noticed him fidgeting behind me, his hand hovering as if debating whether to reach out. And just when he finally seemed to muster the courage, I found myself flustered and pulling away. When we arrived at the entrance of the neighborhood, I spotted Roland Dale standing inside, as though waiting for someone. Alexander froze for a moment before pouting slightly, quickly schooling his expression into neutrality. I'll head off then, he said, his tone tinged with quiet disappointment. The slight pout on his face was oddly endearing. Alexander, I called out, unable to stop myself. Roland and I are just friends. His mood lifted instantly, a radiant smile breaking across his face. The sight of his happiness brought a matching grin to my lips. We hadn't officially discussed what we were to each other, never even broached the subject, but I didn't want him to misunderstand or feel hurt. As I walked into the neighborhood, Roland approached me cautiously. "Jeremy, I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said the other day. And I really don't want to keep fighting with you. Can we just move past it?" I smiled lightly, shrugging it off. "It's fine. I've already let it go." I had. His words didn't matter to me anymore. Besides, I didn't want the tension between us affecting our families, who had clearly started to notice something was amiss. As we climbed the stairs, I joked, "But you know, Roland, you're pretty sharp. You figured things out before I even did." He looked confused. "What do you mean?" I grinned. "That question you asked me, whether I liked him? At the time, I didn't think I did. But now, I think you might have been right. I do like him." Roland froze mid-step, his foot hitting the stair with a noticeable thud. The air between us stilled. "Roland?" I turned back, puzzled. He met my gaze, holding it for a long moment before replying, his voice dry. "It's nothing. Let's go." The next day, Alexander and I went jogging as usual. He had long since adjusted his pace to match mine, staying by my side to help me count laps and timing me at the finish line. This time, though, as I reached out for his usual steadying hand at the end of a run, someone suddenly appeared in front of me. Startled, I instinctively twisted to avoid them, only to feel a sharp pain shoot through my ankle. I tumbled to the ground, biting back a wince. Alexander and the figure hurried to help me up, and it was then I realized who it was. "Roland?" I gasped, still reeling. His face was full of regret. "Jeremy, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." I couldn't muster a response, the pain in my ankle making it hard to focus. The two of them rushed me to the hospital. The verdict, a mild sprain. We sat in awkward silence in the waiting area afterward. Both Alexander and Roland looked equally guilty, their expressions dark. Trying to lighten the mood, I forced a laugh. "Well, at least I've got an excuse to skip the exam now." Alexander, however, was still sulking, his lips pressed into a pout. Meanwhile, the results from our pheromone compatibility test, which we decided to do on a whim while at the hospital, finally came through. Pulling out my phone, I opened the message. Alexander and Roland leaned in close, their heads nearly bumping mine. Together, we stared at the bold red numbers on the screen. 98%. "Whoa," Alexander broke into a grin, laughing. I couldn't help but chuckle too. Only Roland remained silent, his gaze fixed on the screen, his expression unreadable. After dropping me off at the neighborhood gate, Alexander waved and left. Roland, however, insisted on helping me up to my room. As he settled me onto my bed, I couldn't ignore the tension radiating from him. Roland just spit it out. "What do you want to say?" He pulled a chair over and sat down, his eyes meeting mine with a seriousness that made me pause. "Jeremy, I'm not doubting you," he began carefully. "But after seeing that 98% result, are you sure your feelings for him aren't influenced by it?" I didn't hesitate. "Roland, I've been expecting our compatibility to be high for a while now, so I've already thought this through. And I'm sure of one thing. Yes, maybe our initial closeness was influenced by pheromones. But the reason I've grown to like him, the reason I really like him, is because I've come to know him for who he is." The room fell silent, save for the weight of Roland Dale's words. His gaze darkened as he asked, "And what about him? How do you know he isn't being influenced by pheromones?" I chuckled softly, brushing off the concern. "That's for him to figure out. If he can't even distinguish that, then he's not someone I'd choose." Roland lowered his head, saying nothing. The sound of the front door opening broke the quiet. Roland stood, preparing to leave, but I called out just as he reached the doorway. "Roland, I don't know why you've been so tense lately. Let me be a little self-centered and assume it has something to do with me. If you're worried about our relationship fading, don't be. What I feel for Alexander is different from what I feel for you. There's no competition between the two of you. I paused before continuing, my tone firm. But if you think of him as competition, Roland, then you already know who I would choose. The room returned to silence. Roland's hand tightened around the doorknob until his knuckles turned white. His lips pressed into a thin line as though holding back something heavy, something suffocating. After a long moment, he exhaled shakily, opened the door, and walked out. The final exams came and went, and the summer that followed was spent in Alexander's company. We studied together almost every day, tackling practice questions with a mix of determination and light-hearted banter. During this time, Alexander also perfected the art of being insufferably cheeky. Whenever he walked me back to my neighborhood, he would stop me just before I could head inside. His fingers would graze mine, and he'd lightly scratch my palm in a silent plea for attention. My ears would burn in response, no matter how much I tried to suppress the reaction. Seeing this, he'd flash a triumphant grin, leaving me to glare at him in mock indignation. Today was no different. By now, I'd almost gotten used to his antics. Almost. But reason still clung stubbornly to the edges of my thoughts. Pulling my hand away quickly, I attempted a stern tone. I don't do high school relationships. The declaration lacked any real force, and Alexander's laughter followed me as I stormed away, thoroughly embarrassed. To my surprise, I found Roland waiting outside my house. For a moment, it felt like I hadn't seen him in ages. I opened the door, inviting him in. "What's up? Something you need?" He smiled faintly, the expression tinged with bitterness. "Jeremy, can't I just come to talk to you?" Awkwardness settled over me. Of course. The living room grew quiet, a weighty silence hanging in the air. I lowered my gaze, unsure what to say. Then, his voice broke through the stillness. "Jeremy, I like you." "What?" Shock flashed through me, though somewhere deep down, I realized I wasn't entirely surprised. The mix of emotions swirling inside me was hard to untangle. Roland's smile turned self-deprecating. "I thought I didn't have feelings for you, which is why I wanted to set things straight between us. But then, someone else appeared. Seeing you with him made me realize how much I hated it, how much I hated not being the one you trusted most." He raised his eyes to meet mine, his gaze unwavering. "Jeremy, I know it might be too late to say this, but we've known each other for so long. We've been by each other's side for years. Can I have a chance?" I looked away, mulling over his words before speaking slowly. "Roland, I'm sorry. I can't say yes. It's not just because I know I like someone else now. It's because, after that night when you talked to me, I really thought about it. I realized I've never felt that way about you. Maybe I just got used to having you around and misunderstood that feeling. But now, I understand that habit and love aren't the same." After that, our relationship cooled noticeably. Though things felt different between Roland and me, it didn't affect the dynamic between our families. I didn't dwell on it. When the new school term began, I told Alexander about the conversation. His expression shifted like a kaleidoscope, first indignant, then anxious, then curious, and finally, delighted. By the end, as I recounted my response, he practically beamed with satisfaction. Then his eyes sparkled with excitement, brimming with mischief. "Jeremy, so, who's the person you like?" I hadn't expected him to latch onto that detail and was momentarily speechless. But seeing his eager expression, my irritation melted. Rolling my eyes, I shoved his face away, pinching his cheek in mock annoyance. "Don't worry about who it is. And anyway, I told you, I don't do high school relationships. And, I added pointedly, I don't do long-distance ones either." Alexander grinned, wide and unbothered. Fine. Then we'll just date on campus." I sighed. "You're impossible." The day before graduation, as we walked home, I pulled Alexander aside into a small alley near my neighborhood gate. My heart pounded wildly, my nerves threatening to betray me. Gathering my courage, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. The faint scent of brandy surrounded me, grounding me, calming me. "Alexander," I murmured, my voice trembling slightly, "I really want to keep seeing you. I want us to go to the same university." His warm hand settled on my back, pulling me closer. He leaned down, his voice soft and resolute. "Jeremy, let's stay together. No matter what." After exams were over, the air finally lightened, and everyone let loose. A group of classmates planned a trip to Sea City, and Alexander Stollybras and I tagged along. At the hotel, we received our room assignments, 2 people per room. When the room keys were handed out, one of our classmates winked at us, their expression filled with mischief. They leaned in close and, in an overly loud whisper, said, "Jeremy, take it easy, all right?" I froze. What? Sometimes, when you're too stunned to react, all you can do is laugh. Beside me, Alexander turned crimson, his blush climbing all the way to his ears. Our classmates didn't seem to believe that we weren't officially together. Well, not yet. I wasn't in a rush, though. Letting Alexander circle around me all day, fidgeting and trying to muster the courage to speak, was surprisingly amusing. The seaside at night was serene and refreshing. Gentle waves lapped at my feet, cool and clear, leaving a tingling sensation behind. A little further down the beach, our classmates were chatting loudly, the scent of barbecue drifting over as they laughed about the most absurd topics. Alexander suddenly tugged my hand, pulling me back just as the rising tide nearly soaked my pants. The wind carried his voice, soft yet steady. "Jeremy, it's not young love anymore. So, will you be with me?" I kicked at the water, smirking. "That's it? No lead-up? No grand speech?" He flushed deeper, scratching his head awkwardly. "I can't wait anymore." I couldn't help but laugh, coughing lightly to cover it up. "Well, since you're so honest, sure, I'll say yes." His eyes lit up like fireworks, and the next thing I knew, he wrapped me in a tight hug. I could feel the frantic rhythm of his heartbeat against mine, pounding through the thin fabric between us. Later, we lay side by side on the sand, staring up at the night sky. The moon hung high, surrounded by countless stars. Alexander couldn't seem to contain himself. He leaned over and gave me a quick peck on the lips, catching me off guard. I blinked, stunned. "Really?" He chuckled, the sound warm and sweet, melting my annoyance instantly. Turning my head, I found myself looking at him, at the carefree smile lighting up his face. There was something so youthful and wild about him, like he belonged to the stars that glittered above us. I thought to myself, his eyes shine just like those stars. Not far from us, by the barbecue pit, a classmate nudged another. "Hey, where'd those 2 go?" "Over there," came the reply, gesturing toward the shoreline. "Looks like they're having a romantic moment." I knew it. They totally have something going on. And they tried to deny it. My instincts are never wrong. The other 2 classmates exchanged a look, speechless. Back at the hotel room, the moment the door closed behind us, Alexander pinned me against it. His kisses rained down, soft and fervent, unrelenting. As emotions surged, the scent of brandy and grapes began to fill the small space, intertwining and growing stronger until it felt like the room itself was soaked in the heady sweetness. By the time we collapsed onto the bed, I was breathless, my mind foggy. Alexander retreated to the bathroom, the sound of running water snapping me back to clarity. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, I felt a wave of nervousness. This had escalated quickly. Thankfully, we still had suppressants, and neither of us was in a sensitivity phase. Otherwise, though I didn't entirely mind the idea of something happening, I hadn't imagined it would be on our first night together. When Alexander emerged from the bathroom, his damp hair dripping onto his bare shoulders, my thoughts screeched to a halt. Water droplets trailed down his toned chest, a physique honed to perfection. I blinked, thinking absurdly, so those novels weren't lying after all. He was without a doubt tempting. Too tempting. Awkward silence stretched between us as we lay stiffly on the bed, neither daring to move. But eventually, we kissed again, long and messy, His hands braced on either side of me as his breaths came in shallow gasps. By the time we stopped, my lips were swollen and tender, tingling faintly with every breath. The next morning, I woke up to the lingering soreness in my lips and immediately groaned. Alexander, in his usual fashion, tried to appease me with his signature puppy dog eyes and an overly sweet grin. "Fine," I muttered begrudgingly. "Just don't overdo it again." But over the next few days in Sea City, my lips didn't get a single chance to recover. Looking at him now, I felt a twinge of regret. If I'd known this would happen, I might have waited a little longer to agree to date him. When the university admission results came out, Alexander Stollybras practically screamed in excitement over the phone. His joy was infectious, even through the static of the call. On the first day of school, he showed up at my neighborhood, pretending it was just a coincidence. When he spotted me and my parents with our luggage, his expression turned adorably polite and eager. "Oh, what a coincidence. Let me help you with your luggage." My parents exchanged a look, their gazes layered with complexity, as if to say, "This is the one you picked?" I sighed. "Parents." After settling in and completing the registration process, my parents left, and Alexander leaned in with a triumphant grin. "Baby, how did I do? Surprised? Natural, right?" I crossed my arms, deadpan. "Actually, I told them about us ages ago." His smile froze. It was true, my parents had always been supportive of me. I told them about Alexander right after our trip to Sea City, so there was no secret to keep. The only issue was Alexander had been so enthusiastically helpful earlier that I couldn't find a moment to tell him the truth. Now he looked mortified, slumping against my shoulder. I patted his back, amused. "It's okay. You did fine." But his expression shifted, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "I need a kiss to recover." "Seriously?" Not long after we started university, Alexander hit his sensitivity period. It was like caring for a giant, overgrown puppy. Anytime he had a free moment, he would find me and insist on clinging to me. We were in different majors and lived in separate dorms, but that didn't stop him from dragging me to a small grove near my dorm at night, coincidentally, a popular spot for couples. I'd never imagined myself as part of one of those couples, but here we were. He clung to me relentlessly, stealing my clothes to bury his face in and begging for attention with tearful puppy eyes. It was impossible to stay mad, even when his bites left red marks along my neck. Sometimes, when it hurt too much, I'd snap. "We're not even marked. You didn't act like this during high school sensitivity periods." But trying to reason with him during these times was a losing battle. He'd just bury his face in my shoulder, inhaling deeply before mumbling, "I don't care, I just want to." Fine. After a few days of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I asked my parents for advice, then cupped his face one evening. "How about we rent an apartment together off campus?" His eyes lit up instantly, and he nodded without hesitation. "Yes." One afternoon, Alexander finished class early and decided to make dinner. When I got home, the apartment was quiet, the kitchen filled with the warm aroma of food waiting for me. Curious, I walked toward the bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I peeked in to see him intently watching something on his phone. When I got close enough to see what it was, my face instantly heated. Realizing I was there, he scrambled to shut his phone, his face turning bright red. I wasn't. I crossed my arms, grinning. "Oh, so you're sneaking around watching that kind of stuff behind my back?" Caught in the act, his newfound way of hiding his embarrassment kicked in. He charged forward, wrapped me in a tight hug, and buried his face in my neck. "Baby, I swear it's for research," he mumbled, peeking up at me before hiding again. "What if you hit your pheromone phase and I don't know what to do? It could be disastrous." I raised an eyebrow. "I have suppressants. I don't need you, you know." He froze, his pout quickly returning as he buried himself further into my neck. "I don't care. I want to." What could I do? High school had no return policy. One evening, after a club event, Alexander came home so drunk he could barely walk straight. I poured him a glass of water, but before I could set it down, he pulled me onto his lap, wrapping his arms tightly around me. His voice was soft, sticky with drunken affection. "Baby, you don't know how hard it was to hide my feelings for you back then." He giggled to himself before continuing. "And your childhood friend? Ugh, don't even get me started. Always lurking around, making me so nervous I couldn't relax." I blinked, amused. "Sorry, but I kind of figured all of that out already." Still, hearing him admit it made my heart melt. He buried his nose in my neck, inhaling deeply. The scent of my pheromones must have been strong because he sighed happily, mumbling, "Baby, you smell so good." Then, as if realizing something, he suddenly tensed. "You don't think I'm gross, do you? I'll stop if you do." I couldn't help but laugh, turning in his arms to find a comfortable spot to nestle. "You're not gross. You're sweet." His low chuckle vibrated against my ear, his tone soft and warm. "Baby," he murmured, "I never told you this, but before I even realized our pheromones matched, I liked you from the very first moment I saw you. To get your attention, I called you Little Grape. It was all just an excuse." I smiled at his words, heart full as the night stretched on. The end.
Thanks for stopping by. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any new videos.